Romulus founded Rome in the year 753 B.C. After he had built his city, he had some difficulty in getting people to live in it. He had only a few followers and was not able to obtain any more. He decided, therefore, to make Rome a place of refuge, to which people who had got into trouble in other countries might come for safety. And so when those who had committed crime in other places and had to flee to escape punishment found out that Romulus would give them a refuge, they came in large numbers to his city. People also came who had been driven from home by enemies, or had run away for one reason or another. It was not long, therefore, until Rome was full of men. There were men from many different tribes and countries. Thus the Roman nation began, and for years it steadily grew and prospered. But the Romans were much troubled about one thing. A great many of them had no wives, and they could not get any because the women of the neighboring tribes would not marry them, for the Romans had a bad name. Romulus was very anxious that his people should have good wives, but how they should get them greatly puzzled him for a long time. At last he hit upon a plan and began at once to carry it out. He sent messengers to the cities all around to announce that on a certain day a great festival in honor of the god Jupiter would be held on the plain in front of Rome. There were to be games, combats, horse racing, and other sports. The people were invited to attend the festival and also to take part in the contest for prizes. When the festival day came, a multitude of men and women from far and near assembled before the walls of Rome. Hundreds of pretty girls were there in fine dresses. A great many came from the Sabine tribe. This was a tribe of warriors that lived on a mountain near Rome. Suddenly Romulus blew a loud blast upon a horn. Then, quick as a flash, the Romans seized the girls and bore them off to Rome. The Sabines were greatly enraged at this, and their king, Titus Tatius, raised a large army and at once began a war against the Romans. The war went on for 3 years, but the Sabines were so strong that Romulus could not defeat them in the field. He therefore withdrew his army into the city. King Tatius quickly marched after him, resolved to take Rome or perish in the attempt. Now Romulus had erected a strong fortress on a hill near the Palatine, to keep invaders from Rome. The hill was called the Saturnian Hill, and the fortress was in charge of a brave Roman captain who had a daughter named Tarpeia. When the Sabines reached this fortress they could go no further. They marched up and down seeking for a spot where they might force an entrance, but they could find none. There was a small barred gate in the fortress, and through this gate Tarpeia came out to get water. King Tatius saw her. He at once stepped forward and said, "Fair maiden, open the gate and let us in. If you do, you shall have for your reward anything you ask." Tarpeia was gazing with admiration at the bracelets of gold which the Sabines wore on their arms. "I will open the gate," she said, "if you will give me some of those things which your soldiers wear upon their arms." King Tatius agreed, and Tarpeia opened the gate. As the Sabines rode past the silly maiden, each threw at her, not his bracelet, but his shield. The shield then used was round or oblong and made of bronze, or of wicker work or oxhide covered with metal plates. It had 2 handles at the back, and the soldier held it with his left hand and arm so that he could move it up or down to save his head or breast from blows. Tarpeia stood in amazement as the heavy shields began to pile up around her. One struck her, and then another and another. At last she fell to the ground and was soon crushed to death. When the soldiers saw that Tarpeia was dead, they took up the shields they had thrown at her. Then they hurled her body from the top of a great rock that was near the gate she had opened. The rock was afterwards known as the Tarpeian Rock, and for hundreds of years the punishment for traitors in Rome was to be thrown from this rock. As soon as they passed the fortress the Sabines ran down the Saturnian Hill to make an attack on Rome, but Romulus and his band of warriors bravely came out of the city to drive back the enemy. The 2 forces met in the valley, and then a fierce battle began. But while they were fighting, a crowd of excited women came running from the city. They were the Sabine women whom the Romans had carried off. Some of them had their infants in their arms, and they rushed between the lines of soldiers and begged that the fight should stop. "Do not fight any more for us," they said to their fathers and brothers. "We love the Romans we have married. They have been good to us, and we do not wish to leave them." Of course this settled the matter. Romulus had a talk with King Tatius, and they agreed not to fight any more. They also agreed that the two nations should be as one. They joined their governments and their armies, and each of the kings had equal power. Soon afterwards King Tatius died. Then Romulus ruled alone for nearly 40 years. He was a wise and just king, and did a great deal of good for his people. He established a body called the Senate to help him in important affairs of government. It was called the Senate from senex, the Latin word for an old man. It was formed of the chiefs or old men of the earliest settlers in Rome. The descendants of those settlers were called patricians, or fathers, from the Latin word pater, a father. They were the nobles, or upper class, in Rome. The ordinary citizens were called plebeians, from plebs, the Latin word for the common people. Romulus took care to train up the young Romans to be good soldiers. Outside the city, along the bank of the Tiber, there was a great plain which in later times was called Campus Martius, or Field of Mars. Here the Roman soldiers were drilled. They were taught how to use the spear and the javelin, and the sword and the shield. They were also exercised in running and jumping, and wrestling and swimming, and carrying heavy loads. Thus the young men were made fit to bear the hardships of war, and to fight and win battles for their country. It is related that in his old age Romulus suddenly disappeared from the earth. He called his people together on a great field one day, and while he was speaking to them a violent storm came on. The rain fell in torrents, and the lightning and thunder were so terrible that the people fled to their homes. When the storm was over, the people went back to the field, but Romulus was nowhere to be found. Then it was said that his father, the god of Mars, had taken him up to the clouds in a golden chariot. Next morning at early dawn a Roman citizen named Julius saw a figure descending from the heavens. It had the appearance of Romulus, and it approached Julius and said, "Go and tell my people that it is the will of the gods that Rome shall be the greatest city of the world. Let them be brave and warlike, and no human power shall be able to conquer them." Afterwards the Romans worshipped Romulus as a god. They worshipped him under the name Quirinus, which was one of the names of the god Mars, and they built a temple to him on a hill which was called the Quirinal Hill. End of chapter 1.